final project that you were saying immediately, which is a kind of combination of first and second projects. That first one asks you to be able to think or work from the text we've given you and read out of them, discover in them, even steal from it, design criteria, positive or negative. The second little piece is really about actually confronting a something, whatever that something is, whether you hate it or loathe it, and actually engaging with it as a concrete thing, actually kind of coming to terms with it, describing it, analysing it a little bit, briefly, succinctly, but nonetheless, actually getting hold of the thing itself.
Mike, put your mic on.
Sorry. Getting hold of the thing itself, as it were, rather than just the kind of instant image of the thing, as we do with most of the slides, just show you just one quick slide of the thing, but actually getting into it. And then what I want to do on the final project is really to kind of combine these two and ask you to think about using some of the material from this course to define a problem and possibility, an opportunity for possible design innovation. This is why this lecture is so important, because it's all about that. And to, in effect, write a kind of scenario for that design innovation. It can be done in terms of a scenario for a generalized genre. Here I'll give you Constantine Boyme's little essay on the souvenir. I might have given one redheaded, which is a great little example of Boyme's own sort of theoretical writing about the souvenir, which just preceded some of the work he then did as a designer on the concept of the souvenir. He kind of brought this concept back, explained its possible significance for design, how it had been left outside the design, and he kind of brings it back, explains it to himself, and then he begins to produce a series of actually very interesting objects from that. It's not one as an example of the genre. Or it can be around a particular problem or possibility where you dive into the dimensions of that, and you use perhaps a more analytical approach to sort of uncover the levels, so that rather than getting at the superficial level of what seems to be something, we get at the deeper levels of what seems to be something, and out of that produce a series, a kind of deepened understanding of, if you like, problem or possibility, and out of that derive a kind of design scenario. And third one would be to engage with, very much with the details of something. They may be the physical details, or the technical details, or the situational details of something, where really what you're doing is responding to a series of perhaps quite finite qualities inside of things. Say, noticing the problem, the possibility, transforming them, and doing in effect what you'll see if we can get this damn slideshow working, making, if you like, tiny nuances within a thing, tiny changes to a thing, which nonetheless make it operate in completely different ways. And then the very last part of the project, articulated, will be for you sort of looking retrospectively at what you have posited 10 years on. So when you kind of look back at it historically, kind of what did that innovation that you invented, what was its implication? What was that? What were possibilities? So it's trying to combine, using the course, trying to combine an analytical and writing skill with also design thinking. That's really what I'm trying my best to do here. It's not, it can't issue in a visual project, but it can issue all but into a visual, an issue into a scenario for a design. And since a lot of you will be increasingly involved with that, and your thesis will be involved with that, this is a pretty useful, skill to start to develop. Fantastic. Let's see if it works. So that will be the final project. Just pray that we. And so this lecture today is designed to sort of do that. It's probably got more slides in it than any other lecture. This is just typical. It's this one, the final, D4TC. What I wanted to do was to partly do it's linked, you'll see how it's linked to 10th lecture, how it's linked to the previous lectures, but I also wanted to kind of stop, slow down, I mentioned it to a couple of you, and to take a single object and to show how you could pull a single object apart, a single design, significant object, and a true design innovation, because its innovation depends entirely upon the design. And an object designed back in 1931, which is still going strong. Oh, you're a genius. You don't need to do the final project. That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. How you managed that? So, this will take, even if this is going to be a slow lecture, a long lecture, you might well be starting the sections a bit late, but you have to get through to the end to see who did the murder, if you like. Well, there is one point I can stop, we'll see how long it takes. So these are the words I used, partly because they connect with what we've been doing. They connect forward. You'll see that by the next time I talk measurement, I don't mean this term in quantitative terms. I mean it very much in qualitative terms, taking the measure of our lives. That will really be the theme of my next talk, in the middle of the two critical talks we're having by and then by Carl de Salvo. Okay, so let me start. I'll try to indicate some points in this where I think there are really very, very relevant points. So we're not going to try to reproduce the extraordinary fireworks in 10th lecture. Not last week. That was almost kind of worth the price of admission to the course as a whole, I think. But I'm going to take up certain of its themes, you'll see. So the lecture is about mapping, mediation, measurement in design. I keep with these around, as I just said to you, a single object, the idea of slowing us down. We're looking at this object. But I wanted to sort of just to rehearse where I thought we had got to in the last lecture I gave you. In a sense, in the last lecture, we were looking at mediation and transformation in things. We looked particularly as a little case study at the oxo peeler. And what we realized was that the oxo peeler was not just a product. This is the point I wanted to make. We would, in this right up to the 1990s when that was done, we would have looked at the oxo peeler as a product, a piece of product design. And it's really not. It's a situation. That's the key term, I think, here. And I want to emphasize this. The artifact, then, one aspect of this will be the artifact as a lever. Reciprocation exceeds projection. Elaine Scarry's key point here, that we don't actually make a thing. What we make is an artifact which will refer back to human sentience, fourth line. Directly extending its powers and acuity, indirectly, And the last four lines are the key ones. In the attempt to understand making, Attention cannot stop at the object, for the object is only a fulcrum or lever across which the force of creation moves back onto the human sight and remakes the makers. This is the crucial bit. It gets us to the situation, gets us instantly to the ethics of designing, it gets us back to where we should be in terms of design, not as an autonomous activity of thing-making. Things are essential, but they're not autonomous. This idea that things are a lever or a fulcrum. And this links back, this word situation takes us back to Herbert Simon, changing given situations into previous ones. It took us into that notion in Chinese thought, the play between the notion of a situation or configuration and our developing through design iterations, understanding of the potential which is implied by that situation and can be made to play in one's favour. So it's trying to link here to that notion of situation. Design in this view would then be where we design for that which has potential, or able to realise the potential latent in a situation, or so that we design has the propensity to realise to the maximum all that situation is capable of. And we finished up by saying that this is almost identical with ethics. This is in fact ethics. Badiou says we don't need any other, just to be faithful to the situation. That is the ethics. To deal with the situation according to the rule of maximum possibility, to treat it right to the limit of the possible, to draw from it the greatest possible affirmative humanity that it concerns. That is enough ethics. You do that, you've done it. Don't need sort of anything more than that. And this puts us firmly now then back the design, then back into a broader sphere of human action. This is that continuation of Simon's famous quote there. Designing is no different fundamentally from the activity that prescribes remedies for a sick patient or one that devises a new sales plan for companies or social welfare policy for the state. Radical statement about it. It relativizes but does not dispense with the artifacts. I'm still leaving this, the quote from the Texas lady, which I love so much, from the Oxford thing here. The artifact is still the agent in this situation, but it's no longer, if you like, the primate. So this lets us see designing as less instrumental. It lets us see it more contextually. Somehow these slides have slid. I don't know kind of what's happened here. Anyway, no, sorry, they're all down the bottom. I don't know what's happened. Sort of translated themselves here. But this quote by J.C. Jones here, talking about the importance of context. And in this bit here, I want to focus on this last bit where it says, we look at context is really the real generator of newness, design, evolution, halfway through. But then he says, we shouldn't focus on aims, purposes, requirements, functions. These are the design language we focus on. We tend to exclude the main part, which is ourselves. How we change once we experience something. It is ourselves, not our words, that are real purpose of designing. The biggest mistake is to take the product alone. It is always secondary. As we said. Okay. Now all of this related, obviously, to that shift, as Jamer described it earlier on, 3 or 4 lectures ago now, from the modernity of discrete objects to contending with what we have made, which is the shift. And that linked, of course, to this notion of the scales of action. You think of each of these scales of acting that Jamer talked about as involving a situation, albeit one whose complexity grows at exponential rate as you get larger and larger. So this thinks again, and that links back to what we said earlier about 21st century design as a capability of a better set of capabilities, that's what gave you the document, contending with the consequences and implications of the systems we have created. So we began to look to, in this process last week, and there was the idea of the complexity, truly. Complexity to the point of disintegration. We also looked in the last weeks at the idea of things in their three conditions of things: the fictive, the real, and that which we pretend is not made. And we said that where most things that we design, we stay within the real element. There are certain other things we design and create as human beings that are in the fictive. We said that one power of design was to actually play between the real and the fictive, to actually push these boundaries and to remind us, this is the point of Aaron, how much in fact categories determine. There's this old-fashioned statement in design, form follows function. It was never true. What that top slide shows is form follows category. Whatever the category is, in this case home entertainment, form follows it. And Arad's daft little object, you know, this rather silly object, nonetheless throws that into relief. It reminds us that when we're designing, we're not just designing a product, we're designing in relation to a category. That is, so design has the potential ability to break with a conditioning that determines the forms and the relations of things. Conditioning that may be almost unconscious, but which determines behavior. Remember, I showed you the almost unconscious assumptions that have been built into the designing engineering of the first jet airliner, and which made it almost economically useless, in fact, because of these presuppositions which had gone into it, which nobody at the time ever actually questioned. And I also showed you that design transformative action can on occasion be subjectively and socially liberating. The miniskirt was that. Liberating because here in the design of the miniskirt is a perfect example of deconstruction in action. It simultaneously physically sets free and shatters a series of mental, social, categorical conventions and expectations. I'll give you, for those of you who want to read through this later, I put in here a very good quotation from Pierre Bourdieu, which is from his book, An Outline of a Theory of Practice, where he reminds us, from his anthropological background, how all societies set store on often insignificant details, in this case dress bearing physical and verbal manners. And the reason is, he said, by treating the body as memory, they entrust to it in abbreviated and practical mnemonic for the fundamental principles of the arbitrary content of the culture. So we suddenly see, in this case, that a dress is not just a dress. What it's doing is containing these fundamental principles of the arbitrary content of the culture. And when somebody comes along and does something, breaks that, they're doing more than just a bit of fashion change. That's why fashion is actually significant activity of design. So this is important. This is very important. And we also came to the notion too here that and this brings us perhaps here to the third great condition of the artificial, which we didn't quite get to last week here, which the artificial only ever arrives as such in things or situations, in networks and systems. The artificial is tangible, we shall say. Not always literally so, but you see my point. If we discount language, which is a little bit of a mistake, because that's our biggest artifact, the artificial is less spoken than it is demonstrated. This is, I think, very important. Indeed, up until now, demonstration has been the only way to prove the artificial. It works, or it doesn't work. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, as it were. So we demonstrate the artificial. Now, it's worth thinking about this just a little further. It doesn't mean that the artificial is outside of language. We contested that idea a few lectures ago. We saw in an earlier lecture that technology sometimes wishes this were the case, and that technology could be completely unencumbered by language and social norms. But it actually can't be. And we know, in fact, it's actually extremely dangerous when you do. This is a quotation here from a diary of an officer on Stanley's exploratory expedition across Africa in 1887. The expedition had just been issued with new Lee-Enfield repeating rifles, and one officer's diary admits at some point they just couldn't wait to actually test these out. So they came across the village quite early on in their trek across Africa. And they decided to see how their rifles would work. And they did. So, this is quoted in a rather brilliant book by Adam Hochschild called King Leopold's Ghost, which is an assessment of the Belgian Congo and the exploitation in the Belgian Congo in the 1890s. In other words, once you have a technology, you can't resist using it, and the only way to actually resist is, in a sense, to have some sort of ethics about it. Now, what we see here, what I want to get back to is the deeper notion, or not deeper, but to get back to the notion that the artifice occurs in reality, so to say. And I'm going to give you some quotes that try to get hold of this and try to sort of move it, link this demonstration, though, also to discourse. And very nice little statement here, definition of physics by Alan Badiou, which I think I've given you before. It says, in physics there are